Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Overcoming Barriers to Innovation Governance with Agility. And we've got two wonderful panelists here for you today to discuss the topic. You will have come into our webinar muted, so please feel free to stay that way. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping just before we get into it, but we don't want to waste your time, so we'll get into it quite quickly. Brilliant. I can see lots of people joining. This is fantastic. Brilliant. So, yes, you're coming in muted. Please keep yourself muted for us. We want to have a wonderful quality recording for you, which we will send out after today's event. Now, up on the right-hand corner, you'll see a speech bubble with a question mark, and we want to hear from you. I'm hoping today is going to be really interactive, and you're going to get involved with the speakers and by asking us lots of interesting questions. Please do. So in that box, the bubble, kind of speech bubble with the question mark, please put in any questions there for us, and we will either get to them during the webinar or just after. We've got some time at the end planned for all of your questions, so please do have a look at that box, give it a click so that you are confident in writing us a question. We are active on every social media platform, but LinkedIn is the best place to find us, guys. So please do, if you haven't already, get in touch with us, send us a connection request. All the account managers are all on there, along with the rest of the team who share lots of information around our socials about what we're doing here at ILX, the different courses, but also we want to be able to see when your graduates, your delegates do get their certificates. We love seeing them up there on our LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all of them, and especially YouTube. Please do join us on those socials so that you can keep up to date with what we're doing here at ILX. And we want to hear from you. So if you have any feedback about our webinars, please do let us know. We've got some feedback forms that will be coming out to you just after the webinar. Fill them in, but also just reach out and get in touch. Email if you email us as well. We'd like to hear from you and hear how our webinars are impacting and bringing some change within your organisations and to you personally. That's great. Now, I would love to introduce our two wonderful panelists to you here today. We have two people from the Agile Business Consortium, Richard Campbell and Niamh Trundle. And Richard is the product engagement lead at the Agile Business Consortium, and he's dedicated to supporting Agile practitioners by driving the adoption of Agile principles, and he's brilliant. He's going to answer all your questions today on Agile, so if you've got some questions about how you're going to be adopting Agile within your organisations, send us a quick question about that and we'll field those to Richard later on. And we've got Niamh Trundle as well, and she is our learning design lead, and she's going to be answering all things to do with design and learning for Agile, and she's absolutely wonderful, and it's been great getting to know them over the past few days, and I know you're going to have a wonderful webinar here today and learn something new. So pens and papers at the ready to take some notes, or if you're like me, get your Microsoft Doc out, get ready to start typing. I'm going to hand over to Richard now. Richard, thank you. Over to you.
Tremaine, what a great introduction. Thank you very much. It's set the bar ridiculously high, but we're going to make this as interactive as we possibly can. So it'll be a double act between Niamh and myself. But what I'd like to do is start off by giving you a feel for exactly what we're going to go through today. So the title of the event is about enabling innovation, but in the context of where does governance fit into all of this? And some of you may have participated in some questions which we sent out before it. And what we want to do is connect with you and understand what's the nature of the governance problems that you see. So we're going to be talking about, first of all, what does it mean to be in a governed, regulated environment in an agile context? So we'll be setting some rules about that, defining how we view that. And then how organizations adapt their layers of governance. What does it look like as they are wanting to do the right things, but needing to move in a more agile way? And how does the organization adapt to achieve that goal? But then looking in specifically, what are the common barriers that you have as you move towards agility while still trying to be well governed? Then we'll go to our last section will be, let's look at some practical strategies for implementing governance in the Agile world. So we'll be giving various examples as we go through, but please put your questions through, as Tremaine already said. We'll be picking them up. We will need to make this as relevant as we possibly can to you as we go through the event. Okay, so let's get started. And I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to Niamh, really to talk a little bit about business agility generally. Give us a bit of a set the scene for us here.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. So what is business agility? So business agility, it's people-centered, organization-wide capability, purpose-driven to deliver value, and people creatively collaborating in small value-focused empowered teams, harnessing creativity. So, in this world, quality and quality definitions are changing. The cause and effect loop is much shorter. People are no longer resources, but they're actually creative beings working to deliver value. Value focused teams are multidisciplinary. They can do the work almost completely steering themselves. So, business agility is about empowering the teams, those closest to the problem, to figure out the solution. It's also about, things happen, and Richard is going to talk about VUCA in a second. So, you know, um, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, these are all things that we have to deal with increasingly on a day-to-day basis. And business agility is how we can deal with those things. So there's a nice quote from Vivian Green, and it says, "Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning how to dance in the rain." And we feel that that's what business agility allows us to do. We have, leadership principles. We have 9 principles of agile leadership, and they're broken into 3 different sections. We have commitment, collaboration, and communication, which are all really, really important. And they also help us to deal with a VUCA world. So I'll pass over to Richard to talk a little bit about VUCA and what VUCA actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, business agility is a response to VUCA, and I think that much of the governance, given what we're talking about here, is organizations are trying to innovate, and at the same time they are constrained by ways of working, governance practices, which maybe predate the reality of the VUCA world in which we operate today. So what do we mean by this? So exactly as Niamh said, so we've got uh, volatility, as in the world in which we are operating, the markets we serve are constantly changing. There's very little that stays stationary for any length of time. And when you're trying to move in that sort of environment, it requires that those people who are trying to make progress, they need to embrace that volatility. You cannot go into the idea of a project or a product development thinking all things are going to remain fixed. I mean, that's never really been the case, but it's particularly the case today. Uncertainty, what we can say here is that we don't have full information. So as a result, we still need to move forward. We can't just wait until we know everything for absolute fact and no certainties. We have to use our judgment. We have to say, this is our best way of thinking about this based upon the level of uncertainty we are at. How do we move forward? How do we make progress in that sort of context? And the other overriding factor here is, particularly as you move into higher technology, there's massive complexity. The markets we serve, the partners we work with, there's so much going on. There is genuine complexity. It's not simply complicated, as in needing experts to help us what to do. The, the systems that we are interacting with, the processes and the people we're interacting with are not predictable. And that complexity we again have to learn how to cope with. And then finally, ambiguity. What we're referring to here is we have data, but there are many ways to interpret that data. There isn't a fixed way of saying this is absolute truth. So we have to be comfortable in that ambiguous place. Now, when you bring all of that together, and at the same time you say we are trying to operate in an environment where we're being governed by fairly strict, predictable forms of this is how you're going to be doing it, this is how you're going to be reporting on that process, you're in a position where you're constantly stopping and starting your development activities because your governance processes are working directly against your desire to be agile. So business agility is trying to come at it from a very different perspective from traditional ways of working. And many organizations struggle with that journey. So what we'd like to do now is sort of move on and talk a little bit about organizations and their move towards agility. And I wonder, can I pass back over to you, Niamh, and sort of talk a little bit about, what are the sorts of things we need to do in our organizations to move towards agility and respond to VUCA?
Sure. So just to kind of recap what Richard said about VUCA. So if you look at volatility, it's the speed of change in an industry, the market, the world in general. Things are changing faster than we can keep up with, to be honest. So I'll just give you a few concrete examples of those. So prices fluctuating after a natural disaster can take a supplier offline, for example. Then we have uncertainty. So truly uncertain environments are those that don't allow prediction, can't rely on statistics. Like Richard said, the more uncertain the world is, the harder it is to predict. So you might have a competitor's product launch, and that hinders your approach to positioning your own product in the market. Complexity, we're all working in complex environments. Under high complexity, it's impossible to fully analyze the environment and come to rational conclusions. So, an example of that might be you're doing business in lots of different countries and they all have unique regulatory environments that you have to contend with. And then the ambiguity side of things, it's, referring to a lack of clarity around something. You might have incomplete information. You can't draw clear conclusions because you don't have accurate information. So an example of that could be you decide to move to an emerging market with existing products, but you don't have enough visibility of potential adoption. So in a way, it's just kind of highlighting the fact that it's a crazy world out there. So if we take a look at business agility, and how can business agility help us to deal with that kind of situation or those kind of situations? So business agility can help us to adapt quickly to market changes internally and externally. So Richard, I'll pass back to you to just kind of elaborate on how business agility might help us to do that.
I think very good. So, having gone through, we've looked at the VUCA side here, and so where does agility help us to move forward? So, let's take one by one. Let's look at volatility. Let's look at the details of this, and say we talk about volatility being addressed by vision. So, Niamh, what would you say? What's the whole idea? What are we trying to do in this area? How is vision helping us address with the volatility of the markets we serve?
So I think the vision, it's giving us a good overview. We're looking at, if we have volatility, we can't cope when big changes happen, when confusing things happen. Things can happen rapidly overnight. So having a good vision, having a good view of what's going on, and kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture as well.
I think this falls very much down to business leadership to be very clear with our direction of travel. What's actually the most important thing here keeping an eye on the prize. What's the goal? What is the direction of travel? So if you imagine you've got teams trying to make progress on a project or a product development, and there's immense volatility going on, you've got to introduce some stability. And that's the role of the organization's leadership. It should be providing that clarity of vision. So we talk about in agile leadership communication, collaboration, and commitment as being the key to really good leadership. And the vision that is laid down by senior leadership to say, this is what we're going to do. So as the world is volatile, we still have our eye on the prize. And we're able, as individuals, because of that clarity of vision, to make appropriate decisions about how to cope with that volatility.
And to
So
be
I
able
think,
to pivot when necessary and not just
yeah,
stick rigidly to rigid plans because things have changed.
yeah. So what is the genuine role of leadership? I mean, that's really what you're defining here. You're making it very clear that the top level leadership in the organization, if they aren't providing that vision, how can the individual development teams respond to volatility appropriately? And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to engage as many brains as you can to look at the volatility, see through the clouds, and with clarity saying, we're going forward on this direction. That's why it's such a good thing, or whether it's so critical that we have the clarity of vision. So if we move on, so let's look at uncertainty and understanding. So what are your thoughts about that? How do we address the uncertainty problem?
So with uncertainty, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So, we have to pay attention to what's going on around us, as it says on the slide. And, it's not about just carrying on as we always did and hoping for the best. You have to think about, you have to accept the situation that you're in as it stands, and you have to work with your team. You get different perspectives on things, try to make sense of everything together as a team through collaborating. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty, for example, around AI at the moment, whether to implement AI, whether to not implement it. But it's about understanding how AI, for example, can help us with our work rather than replace it, but also about working with the people closest to the problem, and getting the information from the people that know best rather than it being from top down. So you're working with everybody, the teams are involved, everybody is working together to try and understand a situation and create a solution.
Splendid. I mean, I think sort of along similar lines. So let's look at complexity briefly.
hmm
And what we're trying to do is to go from complexity into achieving clarity of vision. Where would you point us in the direction here? Why, how do we achieve clarity when we have complexity?
So there are various frameworks that we can use to achieve complexity. So to not to achieve complexity, but to achieve clarity on complexity. And there are things like the Cynefin framework, Richard, that we're very familiar with. There's the Eisenhower matrix that you can help to kind of get clarity on things. But it is about thinking about the organization's vision and values, not getting distracted by the details, because often you don't actually have all of those details anyway. So I think, we've worked together, Richard, on very complex projects, but it's when we all sit down together and focus on what we're really trying to achieve as a team, and everybody has their input, and we're all, like you said, the 3 C's of agile leadership. We're all communicating, we're all collaborating, we're all committed. I think that's when we all start to get clarity around what we're trying to achieve, and that we can create the right kind of solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sort of sense-making models, there's been a great deal of research done in this area to help organizations understand where they are, what's the nature of the problems they're working on. So you're applying your right thinking techniques to the nature of complexity that you are working with in your project or product development. And again, I think we can provide links if people are interested in some of these things. This is all new learning, which we can point you in the direction of if that's the nature of a problem which you've been facing in particular. So in terms of the last of the VUCAs, let's look at ambiguity briefly. Where do we start here? How do we move to agility when we have ambiguity? What's your thoughts, Niamh?
Well, with ambiguity, we can't really, we can't use fixed plans effectively in a VUCA world. And I think this ties back into governance quite nicely. Business agility can help um, organizations to demonstrate the quality. So, we are in an ambiguous world. Um, we don't have all the right answers, but business agility is helping us to deal with those kind of things. So, a good example, maybe Richard, is the AI policy that we developed recently. So, you know, just to go back to AI, because it's a topic that we've previously discussed. So to build on that, so it's very ambiguous at the moment. There even we were speaking to some AI experts yesterday, and they were saying, they're giving, they're helping people integrate things that they've only learned 6 weeks ago because things are changing so quickly. So, but we also have to have an AI policy in place because we need to have some governance around AI and the ethics and usage and everything like that. So, in the consortium, we were thinking, okay, well, we need an AI policy. So we've created an AI policy, but our AI policy is very much a live document. So it's not set in stone, it's not fixed. Everybody appreciates it's kind of, we put the guardrails in, but we will have to have a bit of wiggle room because things are changing so quickly. And we will need to go in and we need to make changes, and we need to regularly revisit that document, for example, and the guidelines, because they're that's what's steering the use of AI within the organization. So I think agility is a good example of that because it's also helping us to deal with the the AI revolution.
Absolutely. And I think every organization here, for me, well, I'm sure AI hits most of the people who are listening in today, but there'll be other factors as well. There are other things which are where it's introducing ambiguity into the nature of the domain that you're trying to serve. And how do you apply agile principles in that environment? So I think we're going to go further into that in more detail as we introduce some new ideas here for you to have a think about. And so
So
yes. So do you want to go ahead, Niamh? Do you want to talk through the high level of this, of
yeah,
the
I was just going
framework?
to say, I was going to say, so Richard is going to go into the framework for business agility, which we've designed to help organizations to be more responsive, to be more innovative, to be more customer focused. And it has several key areas. I'm going to hand back over to Richard to elaborate on those.
Yeah, certainly. So the consortium likes to take the high level view as to what's the nature of a journey that an organization takes as it moves towards agility, because it's not something you wake up one morning as suddenly you are agile. The journey towards business agility can take a very, very long time. And as the consortium has been sponsoring the Agile Awards for a number of years now, where we ask organizations to talk to us about what's the nature of your journey. And the result of many of those conversations and the analysis we've done to support the investigations into government departments, large organizations, small organizations in a diversity of different industries, we've come up with the framework for business agility as a way of thinking about your journey. So the concentric ring diagram that you see before you can be described with the summary on the right hand side. So it starts in the middle, in the blue area, and you talk about the idea you've got the the core concepts of agile culture, agile leadership, and agile governance. And we're going to be focusing for the rest of the talk very much on the governance aspect of this. But you may be interested in any of these areas, and we can talk to you more about where do you discover more about developing agile culture, leadership, and governance. But without that, you're sort of constrained. So we talk about agility in the organization's culture, leadership, and governance enables the next ring out, which is what we call the teal area. So you've got the agility to operate, to change, and to support your business. And that in turn optimizes your ability to deliver value to your customers, to your people, as in your employees, to your colleagues, as well as to the ecosystem, all the other organizations who serve your sector that you collaborate with. And then the grey circle that is between the teal and the purple ring on the outside, this is referring to strategy, and agility and strategy ensures that organizations maintain focus on the delivery of value. And governance plays to that part as well. So what we're saying, the reason that we put this all together is that you need to be considering all of these different views when you're considering a true journey towards agility. So Tremaine, in a little while, be talking about the specific Agile certifications that the consortium develops and are delivered through ILX. And Agile Project Management, AgilePM, is probably the largest, most popular one of those. And that fits very much in the area of change, the teal area in the middle here. And it gives you a very detailed view as to it builds your competence at delivering the ability to run your projects in an agile way, but it's highly dependent upon the blue circle in the middle. And that's the area which we're really going to be focusing on very much for the rest of this talk.
And Richard, I think, from what you're saying and, tying it back to Agile PM and the other certifications, I think the focus is really on, it's not on the process. The focus is on the capabilities and delivering value and having impact, and the process is the means to the end, if that makes sense. So, when we're talking about agility in governance, in agility in general, and particularly, if we're thinking about governance, it's all about having, it's all about mindset too. Because you were saying you don't just wake up one day and you're agile, so it's all about having that. Instead of having a fixed mindset, it's about having a growth mindset. And that could be growth in your own learning and development, or within the organization, having a growth mindset within the organization from the governance side of things too.
Well, absolutely. And we talk about the transition from doing agile to being agile. And again, that's all part of the journey. So you like to think many organizations, they enter the agile world by applying Scrum, for instance, and you almost are applying it initially in almost like a paint my numbers form of doing it. So you're just doing agile. But actually, agility is about being agile. It's a state of mind. And exactly as you say, it's all pervasive. And it needs to be a cultural change that affects the whole organization. It's not just this team does agile and we don't. Everybody needs to do it, or the organization doesn't become agile as a whole. So understanding that and renegotiating with the organization to achieve agility is a big part of what we're going to be talking about, particularly as we go into governance.
And with our learning within an agile context as well, it might be worth mentioning that there's kind of three different layers. So you have the learning for the individual, so it's the individual's agility. Then you have like the team, so the team's agility and the team's mindset. And then you have the organizational agility. So you have those kind of different layers, but it comes from the individual to the organization, from the organization through to the individual. So it's quite interesting. So we have some
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, we have some challenge. We asked before the webinar. We asked you lovely people, what's the biggest challenge your organization faces when trying to innovate in a regulated environment? And we've had some issues that people have raised. So I'm going to hand back over to Richard to kind of, talk around how these issues can be dealt with
Yeah,
through
definitely.
agility.
Well, first of all, so these ones came in advance of the webinar, but you're more than welcome if you can scan that QR code. Tremaine mentioned this earlier. This will allow you to put your own thoughts on. So, what are the sorts of challenges that you face in running your project or running product developments or whatever aspects of your business you have? Add them in here, and maybe we can pick these up and make sure that we're sort of headed in the right direction. But I think if you just pick up a couple of these just to see, say, I can see here we've got a comment: lack of buy-in from the senior level, resistance to change from all hierarchical levels, numerous bureaucratic processes that imply approvals, checks, extensive time and effort. Now, I think that's a very, very well characterized view that many people have about the nature of governance. And I think I'd like to think we'll step through some more ideas here. But if you are taking on the role of bringing agility into your organization, maybe you're a project manager, maybe you're a product manager, maybe you have a more formal role in the adoption of agility into your organization, we would say that it's part of your responsibility to renegotiate how governance works in order to enable the agility to thrive. Now, and that renegotiation isn't a fixed mindset. You're looking for a win-win relationship here. What you're saying is there's an imperative for the organization to move towards agility for all the reasons we've touched on this far. And we recognize that governance is needed to do the right things, but at the moment they are at loggerheads. We're not making progress. Neither are we governing our processes well, nor are we enabling the agility because it's constant stop start. So how do you get to a position where through agility you can achieve the governance that the organization needs or that your third party regulator needs? Not an or, but an and that's what we're going to try and get to here during the rest
And
of the
Richard,
talk.
I think that the FBA is very important here as well, because governance is not just like a side issue. Um,
Yeah,
it's part of the FBA, the Framework for Business Agility. And when you want to bring agility into governance, you have to think of the leadership, you have to think of the culture within the organization as well. It's all part of that ecosystem. It's not something that's in isolation.
absolutely. Yes, yes, lovely. Anyway, so that was, if you like, the list of governance problems that we had, but what barriers exist? We asked the question, what barriers exist in your organization that limit agile teams from making fast decisions? And I think sort of inevitably you get, I think, almost a reflection of the previous point we got in: senior leaders overly involved in how things are delivered. Decisions are made on what before the why, which means the delivery teams aren't empowered to do what they think is right. That's a very classic example, isn't it? So I don't know whether you want to pick up on that idea, Niamh, but you know,
Yeah, well,
being
I think,
told rather than empowering your teams.
and not having the input from the delivery teams, who, as we said, the people closest to the problem will come up with the best solutions. And then that just that just screams of a hierarchical structure, and we don't have that in agility. We have a flat structure, and teams are empowered to make decisions, because we believe that they are the person closest to the problem, they're the experts in their field, and it's all about empowering those individuals to make those types of decisions rather than um, telling them what to do. And then, it does mention on there as well the barrier hierarchical work environment, adapting to changing requirements. So, agility, we know that agility can help with that. And it mentions here client barriers and internal barriers, Richard. So that's kind of the inward facing and outward facing barriers. So I don't know if you'd like to pick up on that a little bit. I mean, we can work on our organizational barriers and within our teams and within our organization, but sometimes it's a bit more tricky when it's external.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. So I think the reality of it, an awful lot of our governance is constrained by legal contracts, for instance. That would be a great example of it. And so your client barriers um, might be limited by the contract that you've negotiated. Hence, it's vital that your legal team who negotiate the contracts to serve your customers embed in those contracts agile ideas so that there aren't fixed deliverables in the same way. If the customer actually wants to maximize value, you need to bring them into the idea of understanding how agility works. And that's not always possible, but
And that feeds
you need to
into,
have a basis. Yeah, sorry, Niamh.
sorry, I think there's a bit of a delay on my thing. But that feeds into the manifesto. So, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, which we're going to leads us nicely into the manifesto, Richard, if you'd like to um, go through
Yeah.
that.
Yes, as if it were planned. Actually, what I wanted to do, we've got some fascinating comments have been coming in from the audience, and Ashok said, that I love this comment. Minimum viable bureaucracy. What a lovely idea. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I love
think that's
that.
exactly. In fact, one of the ideas is that
MVB.
yes. So, if you might say, what does minimum viable bureaucracy actually mean? But of course, if we're all bureaucrats, none of us are bureaucrats. So if you embed the whole process of administering governance, so everyone is responsible for it. It's not something that some other team do or inflict upon you. It's an active living part, but that I think we'll be touching on that as we move forward. But lovely idea, Ashok. Thank you for the idea here. So yeah, let's take a step back. So much of business agility stems from the original Agile Software Manifesto, and it's now recognized as much wider applicability to business solutions in general. So just to remind everyone that what the summary of it is that individuals and interactions are valued over processes and tools. And so that's the idea behind some of the principles of the manifesto. And what we're trying to do is move towards working solutions rather than comprehensive documentation of it, and customer collaboration over contract negotiation, which actually plays to the point I just spoke about, and responding to change versus following a plan. And that's not to say that we don't value the items on the right, and you do need to do a certain amount of the things on the right, but that's many of the things that are characterized by governance, if you like. But agility requires us to have a focus on the things on the left. And how do we make sure that the items on the right aren't actually completely hamstringing your ability to do what you're actually trying to do with agility, which is the things on the right, and
And I
ultimately
think
get
that's
work.
often misunderstood, isn't it? When people are thinking about agility, they think that, and they're looking at the manifesto and they're thinking that we exclusively only look at the items on the left, but it's not. They're the key, but we still have to have the individuals and interactions. We value them more, but we still need to have processes and tools. Or the customer collaboration, we still need to have contract negotiation, but we want to involve the customer, so it's the customer collaboration that we place more emphasis on, but we're not discarding the others.
Absolutely. So I'm very well aware that we are running out of time. So I sort of feel that we need to accelerate through in order to get to the bulk of this, which is a big part, which is to talk about, well, what in practice can we do to move agility and governance forward? But we've come up with this statement to sort of guide us in the right direction. So what we're trying to move to with governance is it needs to be considered to be a light touch, flexible approach to ensuring that the activities of the organization remain aligned with the values and intentions of its sponsors and regulators. So again, it's a renegotiation of how you do your governance, but it accommodates agility. And that's what we're effectively asking you, the audience, to consider. How can you renegotiate with your customers, with your legal department, with your finance department, with any other regulatory bodies within your organization, so that they can appreciate the value of what you're trying to do with agility and work with you to find workable solutions? So that is the challenge of governance. But let's talk a little bit about the details of what we're trying to do here. So just to summarize, we're trying to do the right things and, of course, do them in the right way. And governance is very much about demonstrating that 1 and 2 are achieved, whilst aligning with the wider organizational purpose. So we need to be, goes back to that point that Niamh made right at the beginning about vision and the importance of leadership, to be clear on what we're actually trying to achieve. What are our priorities? What are our goals? And I would say maybe Niamh, Moscow, where does this fit into it? Moscow prioritization, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, Moscow prioritization just allows you to, you've got the musts, you've got the shoulds, the coulds, the won't have this time, and it just, we use it a lot, Richard, don't we? So it allows us to really focus on what we need to do, and we're not worried about the things that we can't do this time. And it allows us to prioritize and figure out a plan and break down, things into different tasks, whatever. So Moscow prioritization or other prioritization techniques really help us to focus on the job in hand, if you
And what's
like.
absolutely the most important things, and what has to give when we're
Yeah.
trying to make sure we're doing the things which are most important. Absolutely. Yes. So in terms of looking in practical terms, here's a bunch of ideas which you can consider. And I wonder whether, Niamh, you want to introduce, and maybe I can build on
Yeah.
some of the details.
Sure. So we have, thinking about governance now and thinking, about what we looked at with the manifesto, and we have the items on the left and the items on the right. But if we think about it in a governance context, we're thinking about radical transparency over subjective bureaucracy. So that sounds quite, that sounds quite interesting, Richard. So like, it's radical. Why is it radical? What is radical transparency?
So I think in a governance context, what we're trying to get away from, and I think it goes back to Ashok's idea. And by the way, he put a very interesting. Apparently, the minimum viable bureaucracy is actually a well-known term. I haven't come across it. I'm going to read that article when I've finished, and I recommend others have a look at it. But it's exactly this point. It's how do we get to a position where instead of spending a lot of time documenting processes and having others approve them and so forth, radical transparency says, think about the way that you are being agile and you're executing it, and making that very visible, explicitly visible for others to come in and inspect whenever they need to. So you're not
Hmm.
having to do a separate activity of reporting on what's going on. So in the context of a team, lots of organizations use Kanban boards that show what are we working on right now? What have we finished? What are the things we're about to do? Now, if you make that available to those who are governing you at any time to come in, see where you are and ask questions and engage in the process, that then gets away from a whole bunch of the governance problems which typically hit organizations.
And we also use,
Anyway,
within the consortium, we use Obeya as well, which is great, isn't it, Richard? So we have an overview of everything.
exactly, at the higher level, exactly. So
Hmm.
whilst a Kanban is very good for an individual team, when you start to deal with multiple teams or whole organizations, a Bayer is a Japanese term, which is a room to go in and see all aspects of all projects and the interplay between all of them. So it's more of a managing your wider portfolio of activities and the interplay between them and the relative priorities. And again, open this up, develop this, and allow it for inspection for those who are involved with governance, whether it's legal, whether it's financial, cultural, whatever the compliance aspects we're trying to deal with here, make it radically transparent.
And that way everybody can stay informed as well. The next thing we have on the list is trusted autonomy over hierarchical control.
So again, these are ideas of agility which we spoke about earlier. So the idea, you've got a team. Are leadership genuinely empowering them, trusting them to make the right decisions? Again, the vision is clear. We know where we're going. The leadership is laying clear guardrails for what we should be doing, but trust that team closest to the problem to make the decisions. So that's what we mean by trusted autonomy, rather than every time you've got a decision, asking somebody up in the clouds to come up with the decision, what we're going to do here.
Or people
So
trying to micromanage.
exactly, yes.
And collaborative responsiveness over diffuse deliberation.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is bring expertise into the team where the decision's being made, inform the team. This is where workshops and conversations actually happen, not emails that go off and you never get correct answers and ambiguity comes in the information that comes back. It's about interaction, people to people. Make a decision, decide what to do, act on it, make progress. And that's what we mean by collaborative responsiveness.
And the last one we have here, Richard, is informed judgment over scripted process. So what does
Yeah,
scripted process mean?
yeah. Well, so it's rather than have effectively a predefined process for how you do things. What you're trying to do is employ smart people, use their creative imagination, use their intelligence, encourage them with the growth mindset to continually learn and make connections in the organization, build connections so that you are better at making decisions. You achieve informed judgment when you have that growth mentality. And that's what the organization is all part of the culture that builds into all of this.
And all agile organizations are learning organizations. An agile mindset is a growth mindset, and that informed judgment comes through those principles of agile leadership and the 3 C's, so collaboration, commitment, and communication, because that's what leads to informed judgment essentially.
So I'm very aware there's been various questions that have come in over the course of the event, and I don't want to crash into the Q&A session. So I want to close out really just before I hand back to Tremaine and talk a little bit about specifically Agile Project Management, Agile PM, and an aspect of it that would give organizations a really good insight to making progress with governance. In particular, there's an instrument called the Project Approach Questionnaire. Now, I don't expect you to read that text unless you've got remarkable eyesight, but it's a formalism of a way for a project manager to go out to everybody who's involved with the project and try and understand where are the big risks, where are the problems that we have within the project moving forward in an agile way. And what we're doing is we're grading each one of these various questions. There's 17 questions in it, and you're gaining a consensus of opinion from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and that's giving you a flavour for where the nature of the problems are within your project. And there are two questions in particular, statements 10 and 17, which I've really got right to the hub of the nub rather of agility or other governance in agility. And if you're getting statements, this is your red flags. This is which should highlight where your governance problems are. And as a project manager and the leadership of a project, for instance, you should be taking this up and renegotiating this way that governance is working based upon any answers that you might get associated with the two statements. So statement 10, empowerment of all members of the Agile team is fully appropriate and sufficient to support the day-to-day decision making needed to rapidly evolve the solution in short focused sprints. So if the team don't feel that this is actually true because the regulatory environment, the governance that's implied is constraining that. You need to understand that as a project manager and then use some of the techniques which we've spoken about this far to solve that problem. So I think we've run out of time here, and I'm going to now hand back to Jermaine to take us through to the Q&A.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you both so very much. That was really brilliant. I've learned a lot. I now know about VUCA. I did not know about VUCA previously to today, so thank you. It's great to
It's
understand how
everywhere,
to.
Tremaine. VUCA is
It's,
everywhere.
I mean, I need to get with it, clearly.
Yeah.
But no, thank you. Just understanding some of the issues that are affecting people and getting their companies to be more agile rather than just the teams and the individual. That's fantastic, and I appreciate that. We want to get straight onto the questions, so I'm going to quickly go through a few things here because I know a lot of you would like to know what we offer here at ILX for you to support you in changing your teams and your organizations into those that are agile. And that just means that you will need some support in understanding how to do that. So we have AgilePM, which Richard has already touched on, and we have the new version 3 out now. It's a little different to the version 2, a little bit more creative, I would say, especially in the practitioner way of doing things. And there's some Scrum essentials in there as well. So those of you that are in your Scrum teams, there's some information in there that will really help you in AgilePM. And there's a foundation and a practitioner level for that as well. Agile BA for our business analysts. So looking at agile principles and how you're going to apply them specifically in your role. And we have Scrum Master, as we know, and Scrum Product Owner also. And they are available in the different modalities. So we've got e-learning, live virtual classroom, which are quite similar to today, but a lot more interactive because we've got so many of you, 60 to 70 of you on the call today. So thank you for the questions that have all come in and you keeping it interactive. But when we're doing our live virtual classrooms, they're a lot smaller. So we've got a maximum of 15, 16 people per course. And then we've got the classroom courses and my favourite way, which is blended, which gives you the option to have both e-learning, virtual and classroom courses together in one course. And then we've got my favourite courses that we offer here at ILX, which is professional skills courses. And again, Richard, you touched on it where we have in the Agile Manifesto, people over tools and processes. So we need to be focusing on our people, particularly with the skills that they can develop to become our well-rounded people. So mastering communication skills, I've actually done this course. It's fantastic. The tutors are great. So all these courses are available either virtual and in classroom, and you can have a half day or a full day course, and we can tailor them for groups as well. So let us know if this is something you need. So building and managing stakeholder relationships, internal stakeholders, how does your team look to the wider company, but also our outside stakeholders as well. Leading during periods of change, you definitely touched on this, guys. So in our VOCA, I'm going to say it again, VOCA, am I saying it right? I hope so.
VUCA, yeah,
Volatile,
or VUCA,
VUCA,
some people.
VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments.
Yeah.
We need to be leading during periods of change, and how to make good decisions confidently. And then finally, building and telling the data story. I love a database, I love some data, but we need to make sure that we're able to take that data and be able to communicate it well to other people within our teams and to the wider business and sometimes to our clients. So do let us know if these are any of the courses that interest you and your teams, and we will get you some custom information through to you. I'm going to quickly hand back over to you, Niamh, before we do questions and answers, just so that we can go through a bit of what the Agile Business Consortium offers for membership.
Yeah, so with the Agile PM, so if you complete that Agile PM practitioner and get certified, you will automatically get recognition as a professional level 1 in the Agile Business Consortium. We have a competency framework here. You can build your competencies from level 1, level 2, level 3, up to catalyst and thought leader. They're organized, so level 1 is a focus much more on the individual, level 2 is more on a team, level 3 is more on the organization, and then catalyst and thought leader are kind of people that are bringing agility forward. So that would be the completing Agile PM version 3 practitioner will get you on on that route. We also have a membership that we've just released recently, so all the information is on the website.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got some questions and some comments, I think, in the box. So let's just go over there quickly. Thank you both. Okay, let's go to Ashok's question. I know that you did touch on this already, Richard, but you may want to elaborate a little bit. With Agile, it is often difficult to report in the usual way to directors and managers, making Agile report waterfall impossible. So what do you do to overcome this tracking and reporting with Agile?
Well, I would say there's almost like a brute force approach, and then there's the agile approach. So you could simply try and struggle in an agile way to do what your governance is asking you to do. And I would always advise at the first attempt, renegotiate. It's going back to this idea. We spoke about the Kanban boards, we spoke about potentially the ABARE boards. You've got lots of information about what we're actually doing and the decisions we're making to move to bring the project forward, bring the product development forward, whatever is the thing that you are concerned with, it can be in there and already documented. Can you renegotiate with those who are governing to use the information you already have or the things you are already doing as part of agility to answer the governance questions, rather than having to do some sort of bureaucratic administrative process, which is never actually going to be as real time and current as you're already doing, probably. So it is a renegotiation. That's what falls to agile professionals to learn how to arm themselves with the right arguments as to why this is the right thing, why this is actually a win for governance, whilst also being a win for the business generally to move towards agility.
Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to skip across to the next question. I'm hoping that answered your question there, Ashok. So how do you get organisations such as the central government and local authorities to be more agile, business focused in line with their governance, change the old school mindset and move away from a more linear approach?
Wow, that's a big question.
It's a big ask.
Well, absolutely. What's actually quite notable? I, I want to avoid going political here, but in the House of Parliament, Keir Starmer actually stood up in one of his first speeches and spoke about agility, specifically in the context of what government needs to do in terms of moving faster. Now, I'm not saying that in the Cabinet Office they're talking business agility, but these sorts of ideas were fairly fundamental to that talk. Now, if it's being raised at that top level, it ought to be in each department, which therefore must be in each directorate or any other part of the government or state institutions. They must be aware of this. And again, it really it falls on agile leadership within the organization to be able to take the argument to the customer, to the regulator, to the organization you're working with, and saying, for us all to win in this VUCA world, if they accept that we are trying to operate in a different way, we've got to address governance in a different way. Seek that win-win. It does still boil down to negotiate in good faith, try to find a position where you can both win.
And I think, Richard, identifying the issues within those organizations, we do have tools such as the culture tool and leadership tools that kind of can analyze the culture, the leadership, areas that need to be worked on and developed, strengths and weaknesses, that sort of thing. So that can be quite, because you kind of get a report, so that's quite useful as well.
Absolutely. Yes, measuring these things are very difficult. The culture
Yeah.
of the organization, both the customer organization and your own organization, and therefore where are the priorities for changing the culture to make governance and agility work together better? Very good area. Well said, Niamh. Yeah.
Amazing. Guys, we are going to go over just a few minutes, but I'd love to get all your questions in quickly. So the next one, can Agile be aligned with other project governances, for example, Prince2, PMBOK Lifestyle, or is it better to run it entirely separate?
I don't think that we'd ever argue. We spoke about the idea of agility being a journey, and you have to accept where you are at the moment. And if some of the practices that you've said, this is how we currently run our projects, this is how we currently do our product developments, or what are the things we do, on as you move towards agility, you like to think, well, what can we do to build on what we currently do that's good? So whether it is Prince, whether PMI, whatever the things that you do, your ways of working, look for ways of adopting more and more agility. And you might say, well, actually, we need to change this thing fundamentally in order to move forward with agility. But you don't want to be throwing out everything, but you want to be a planned approach. So I would never say it's an all or nothing thing. It's a journey most organizations are on. And even across an organization, you can have some teams that are, if you like, pure agile and others are not. And that's also reflecting on the nature of the projects or the products that are actually being developed, that might be better suited to one style of development than another. So no, it's not an absolute one way or the other, I would argue.
Lots of thumbs up there to your responses. Thank you. So the next question, how do you use agility to advocate for your work when the organisation is cutting costs simply because there are no money with regards to people expertise and value add?
Yeah, well, I think that if we were a magic organization, we could give you instant answers here. But ultimately, it's about working out what's most important, and it's top level value. Now, what agility does for you, particularly about looking through the lens of the framework for business agility, it helps you realize where your major problems are. What's the most important things you need to do? What are the things you have to move to get some agility into your process? If you are constrained by budget and resources, and every organization is, let's be frank about
Yeah.
this,
Hmm.
it's always important you work out what's the most important. Niamh was talking about, we were talking about Moscow earlier on, the Moscow prioritization. It's a good mental model. What must we do? Otherwise the business goes bust. What should, or the project will fail. What should we do? I said it's really important, but it's not, the project or the business is not going to fail if we don't do this. And be very clear on those things. And then what are the things we could do if we've got spare resources to do? And what are the things we absolutely won't do right now? We might want to do really urgently in future, but we won't do because we're focusing on what we must do. That is what agility can really drive you towards: clarity, vision, alignment. That is the most important thing when resources are scarce.
I like that. Like that. Another claps there. So is agile business similar to digital disruption innovation? Hmm.
Ooh.
Do we
Um,
understand that? Do we need a little bit more clarity on that question?
well, I think I
Hasnat,
could.
help us out a bit.
Um, well, I think that digital disruption is a characteristic of the adoption of technology, and clearly technology adoption is a big part of where business agility is seeking to apply.
Yes.
So I would say it's related. It's not the same thing. It's a characteristic of it. You can use business agility to address that, as if that is part of what you are doing. Maybe your competitors are using it to disrupt markets. And how do you counter that? And again, business agility, because of what you're dealing with there is massive complexity, massive volatility. How do you respond to what competitors are doing or what the market is behaving in a different way?
And we actually have a business agility think tank group. It's really hard to say that with an Irish accent. Sorry.
You did
And
very well.
thank you, my THs. And there's, a group thinking specifically about AI and technology and their position on all things AI, etc., and bringing new technology in and disrupting the workforce, disrupting things, our ways of working, is that agility naturally complements it. So it helps us to embrace the technology so that we're working together because it's the human. We had a webinar about it yesterday. So it's the human characteristics that become ever more important. So the technology and stuff that's disrupting, yeah, that's great on the one hand, but having an agile mindset and, agile characteristics helps you to work with the technology rather than working against it or having a kind of, distinction between the two. So it's, kind of like a collaboration of sorts.
Fantastic. It's less of a question, more of a comment from Hasnat. I don't know if this is something you can help with. It would be nice to see examples of organisations that have benefited from using the agility approach. And then it says, e.g., Valve Money.
Oh, could you repeat that to me? I just had a
Yeah.
sorry.
It would be nice to see examples of organisations. Do you know of any examples of organisations that have benefited from using the agility approach, so the agile approach?
I think we've got
Yeah,
lots of case studies, Richard. We also have the awards. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think that's a very good example. I mentioned earlier, so the consortium runs the Agile Awards every year, Agile Business Awards every year, and what we do there is we pick out, we troll the whole world, and we look at large, government departments, whole cities. Dubai, for example, like the whole city of Dubai as an example of it. Look at major things that are going on, small things that are going on, and pick the very best examples of what their journey through agility has looked like. You can look at recordings from previous years' talks and fascinating ones there, well worth watching. And we've got the new awards are going to be sitting in September this year, I believe. I don't know, the
Mhm.
date, but
Um,
those are
sure.
really great examples of organisations to talk about what was their journey like, what have they learned, you know, what are they going to do next.
And we
There
have
are
lots of case studies that have come out of that, don't we? We've got case studies on the website, and all of those organizations, when they go through the process for applying for an award, they have to map everything back to the FBA. So they're being evaluated on their agility in accordance with how they've developed each area within each area of the FBA. So, if you're particularly interested in governance, you can have a look at the governance areas or culture, leadership, or just the whole thing. So there's some really fascinating insights, and there will be an insights report released, I think, in the coming months. That gives a kind of summary of all the applicants and the insights that the Agile Business Consortium got from that application process with all these organisations.
Brilliant. Guys, we're going to quickly wrap up. I know we've gone over a few minutes, but there was so much nuggets of information there. We needed the time just to get it all out. So it's okay. Guys, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And Richard, Niamh, was great. I appreciate it. And
Thanks
I've
a million.
understood and learnt so
Thanks,
much.
Romain.
Take care, everybody. And we'll get the recording out to you very soon. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.